Hello, welcome to Talking the Secret Doctrine. My name is Dr. Don Franklin Shepherd, and today we will be continuing our examination of the third part of the first volume of H.P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, in particular, one of her most famous sections entitled Gods, Monads, and Atoms, which in this case we will be looking at pages 613 to pages 619. Once again, we will be using H.P. Blavatsky's The Secret Doctrine, published by Theosophical University Press, located out at Pasadena, California. So let's go ahead and take a look at page 613, and let's see what she has to say about this theme of gods, monads, and atoms. The first thing to point out is that I think of all the sections in The Secret Doctrine, this perhaps is the one that is least understood. Because gods, monads, and atoms is in fact relating, for the most part, to the fifth layer and below of the mundane egg. Gods as the fifth layer of the mundane egg. Monads, in this particular case, as the fourth layer of the mundane egg. And the atoms as the combination of the third, second, and first layer of the mundane egg. So with that in mind, let's turn to page 613 and let's look at the third paragraph. Laplouche shows sincerity, but gives a poor idea of his philosophical capacities when declaring his personal views on the monad or the mathematical point. A point, he says, is enough to put all the schools in the world in a combustion. But what need has man to know that point, since the creation of such a small being is beyond his power? Fortiori, philosophy acts against probability when, from that point which absorbs and disconcerts all her meditations, she presumes to pass on to the generation of the world. But a point is not beyond our perception. A point is not beyond our speculation. A point is not beyond inference. A point is not beyond our direct experience. And we move on, taking a look at paragraph number 4. Philosophy, however, could never have formed its conception of a logical, universal, and absolute deity if it had no mathematical point within the circle to base its speculations upon. It is only the manifested point, lost to our senses after its pregenetic appearance in the infinitude and incognizability of the circle, that made a reconciliation between philosophy and theology possible. So let's take a look at this point, along with the lines that extend from it, in the finest philosopher of Western philosophy, Immanuel Kant. Blavatsky actually talks quite a bit about Immanuel Kant, whether in her collected writings or in The Secret Doctrine, but he's been a marginalized figure in our studies of theosophical literature. Let's take a look and see what Immanuel Kant says. And we'll begin with Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. In this case, this is the Penguin edition. And just taking a look at page 249, Kant is discussing the theme of alteration. And this is what he writes. In order to exhibit alteration as the intuition corresponding to the concept of causality, we must use motion as alteration in space for our example. Indeed, only thus can we gain an intuition of alterations, the possibility of which no pure understanding can ever comprehend. Alteration is the combination of contradictorily opposed determinations in the existence of one and the same thing. Now, how is it possible that from a given state, another state opposed to it should arise in the same thing? No reason can conceive without any example. Nay, reason cannot render it comprehensible to itself without an intuition even. This intuition, however, is that of motion of a point in space, the presence of which in different places, as a sequence of opposite determinations, gives us for the first time an intuition of alteration. For in order that we may subsequently make even inner alterations thinkable, we must make time, as the form of inner sense, figuratively comprehensible to ourselves by means of a line, and the inner alteration by means of the drawing of that line by means of motion. In other words, we must make the successive existence of ourselves in different states comprehensible by means of outer intuition. So for Kant, we understand ourselves through points and lines. For Kant, we understand space and motion through points and lines. It's such a beautiful passage in Kant. I can't help but seeing the second logos, mula prakriti, is space. The points is the third logos. Now seeing motion, and as Kant says, we get time. It's a beautiful passage. Let's take a look to see what Kant says in Critique of Judgment. In this case, Oxford World Classics. And we're going to take a look on page 192. This is what Kant writes at the top in the first paragraph. The figure of a circle is an intuition which understanding is determined according to a principle. This principle, which is arbitrarily assumed and made a fundamental conception, is applied to space, a form of intuition which similarly is only found in ourselves and found a priori as a representation. It is the unity of this principle that explains the unity of the numerous rules resulting from the construction of that conception. So the circle in our intuition, which is ourselves. Finally, let's take a look at one more work of Kant's. This one is Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics. This is also published by Cambridge Text in the History of Philosophy. And if we take a look over on page 73, this is what Kant writes. By contrast, that which determines space into the figure of a circle, a cone, a vortex, or a sphere is the understanding insofar as it contains the basis for the unity of the construction of these figures. The bare universal form of intuition called space, that's H.P. Blavatsky's bare subjectivity of mula prakriti, is therefore certainly the substratum of all intuitions, determinable upon particular objects. Those objects coming from the third logos and extending out into the 7 layers of the mundane egg. And admittedly, the condition for the possibility and variety of those intuitions lies in this space. That is, everything's coming out of this silence, the second logos, and we hear its voice, and then we begin to speak. But the unity of the objects is determined solely through the understanding, and indeed according to conditions that reside in its own nature. That is, they reside in the nature of the second logos, the substratum. It's a beautiful passage. Kant was a real occultist in many ways. So this is what she writes on 613. Let's go ahead and turn the page and take a look to see what she continues to say on the top of page 614. Those unable to seize the difference between the monad, the universal unit, and the monads, or the manifested unity, in this case, the universal unit is the 7th layer of the mundane egg that holds it all together, that surrounds it as its aura. And the monads, or the manifested unity is going to be all those monads that are evolving out of the 6th layer of Aditi, as also between the ever hidden and the revealed logos, or the word. So the ever hidden and the revealed logos of the word, so the ever hidden being that potential point that never really leaves potentiality, becoming the active point, which in our talks has been called the third logos, and then fully becoming the word as the 7th layer, the swabhavat of the mundane egg. Ought never to meddle in philosophy, let alone the esoteric sciences. So she points out here that these things need to be understood, and it's why this channel has emphasized how the 3 logae relate to the 7-fold mundane egg. She continues, it is needless to remind the educated reader of Kant's thesis to demonstrate his second antinomy. Now, antinomy means that you have 2 views that are both reasonable to the human mind. It's a dialectic. We have a thesis, we have an antithesis, and we have a synthesis. And so the idea here of an antinomy is that one view appears reasonable, another view appears reasonable, they both appear reasonable, and the human mind can readily argue either position. And in doing so, we arrive at a slightly deeper understanding than either one of the initial 2 points. And Kant's second antinomy is the one which asks whether a composite subject is made of simple parts, and if so, how? And it can be argued either way, but this is what she's dealing with here, and she continues. Those who have read and understood it will see clearly the line we draw between the absolutely ideal universe and the invisible, though manifested, cosmos. And here she spells it with a K. So when we're dealing with this ideal universe, we know that she's referring to the first 3 logoi and the invisible, though manifested, cosmos as the 7 layers of the mundane egg. But she draws a line between these 2 things. And like in Kant's idealism, she likes to place the 3 logoi above. She likes to have a dividing line. She draws that dividing line at the 7th layer of the mundane egg, and she likes to separate out those 3 higher layers from the 7 layers below. And Kant, in his transcendental idealism, does the same thing. She continues, our gods and monads, now in this case, gods and monads are a reference to the 5th and the 4th layers within the mundane egg, are not the elements of extension itself. Because extension itself here is referring to the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st layer of the mundane egg, but only those of the invisible reality which is the basis of the manifested cosmos. Neither esoteric philosophy, nor Kant, nor Leibniz would ever admit that extension can be composed of simple or unextended parts. So what H.P. Blavatsky here is referring to is that we have to go back to a circle. We have to go back to a point. We have to go back to an unextended circle. We have to go back to an unextended point from which the lines of extension can be drawn in order to understand esoteric philosophy. She continues, but theologian philosophers will not grasp this. The circle and the point, which later retires into and merges with the former, after having emanated the first 3 points and connected them with lines. Here she's gone back to discussing the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd logos. After having emanated the first 3 points and connected them with lines, thus forming the first numinal basis of the 2nd triangle in the manifested world. So from those 3 logoi come the 7th, 6th, and 5th layers of the mundane egg, the 2nd triangle in the manifested world, have ever been an insuperable obstacle to theological flights, etc., etc. To understand the secret doctrine, it is very helpful to have real philosophy, which we find in Kant, of circles, points, triangles, lines, and even squares within the circle. Let's continue over on page 614. At the very bottom in the last paragraph. The monad, only the emanation and reflection of the point, logos, in the phenomenal world. So the monad in this case becomes as the apex of the manifested equilateral triangle, the Father. So we have the highest 3 logoi, the point, the logos in the phenomenal world, and we have the monad as the 7th layer of the mundane egg, becoming the Father, Oyahu. The left side or line is the duad, the mother. So now we have the 6th layer of the mundane egg. We have a deity, regarded as the evil counteracting principle. Evil and counteracting because a deity drops into the 4th layer, just as the 4th layer of the mundane egg, just as Sophia, as the 6th layer of the mundane egg, becomes Sophia Akamoth in the 4th layer of the mundane egg, which is why she's referred to as evil. Counteracting principle. The right side represents the sun, his mother's husband in every cosmogony, is one with the apex. That's because the sun is the 5th layer. The 5th layer of the mundane egg, and now we're dealing with the world of the gods. The sun is a god. And it's referred to as the mother's husband because in this 2nd manifested triad, the sun is one with the Father. The 5th layer of the mundane egg, from one perspective, is equal to the 7th layer of the mundane egg. At the basic line is the universal plane of productive nature, unifying on the phenomenal plane Father, Mother, Son, as these were unified in the apex in the supersensuous world. So the line below is the fourth layer of the mundane egg. So the solar suns. So we start with the seventh layer, the great central sun, working in that space that then creates the gods, and then those gods work through the solar suns. That's what's going on here. By mystic transmutation, they became the quaternary, the triangle became the tectactris. So we've already dealt with quaternaries. We can look at a quaternary in many different ways. We can look at a quaternary as the third logos, connected to the seventh, sixth, and fifth layers of the mundane egg. We can look at a quaternary as the seventh layer of the mundane egg, connected to the sixth, fifth, and fourth layers of the mundane egg. We can look at a quaternary as the first logos, second logos, and third logos, connected to the seventh layer of the mundane egg. So there's many different ways to look at the quaternary of the tectactris. And let's go ahead and continue on page 616, and let's see what she says about these circles, points, and lines. She writes there in the second paragraph, "It is argued that the human mind cannot conceive an indivisible unit short of the annihilation of the idea with its subject. This is an error. That's because we can. Our inner vision through direct experience can perceive a monad. It can perceive a point. It can perceive a circle. It can perceive an immaculate white disk. As the Pythagoreans have proved in a number of seers before them, although there is a special training for it, indeed there is, and although the profane mind can hardly grasp it, indeed that is true. But there are such things as metamathematics and metageometry." And she goes on to talk about that, and she writes this: "The teaching originated in India and was taught in Europe by Pythagoras, who, throwing a veil over the circle and the point, which no living man can define except as incomprehensible abstractions, laid the origin of the differentiated cosmic matter and the basic or horizontal line of the triangle. Thus, the latter became the earliest of geometrical figures." On page 617, she continues, at the very bottom of the second paragraph. "In the realm of the esoteric sciences, the unit divided ad infinitum, instead of losing its unity, approaches with every division the planes of the only eternal reality. The eye of the seer can follow and behold it in all its pre-genetic glory." That is, we can follow the third logos, the central point, as it returns into the darkness of space and reunites along the plane of the immaculate white disk with its father, the first logos. And let's go ahead and continue on page 619 and look at the very top. Page 619 and look at the very top in the second paragraph. "The scintillas are the souls." So here we're dealing with the fifth layer of the mundane egg. The scintillas are the souls. "And these souls appear in the threefold form of monads, atoms, and gods." Well, there she's just explained it. It takes her a while to explain it, but she gets there. And a lot of people who've studied the secret doctrine have missed this passage, because if they had paid attention to this passage, they would understand that we're here dealing with the mundane egg, and we're dealing with the fifth, the fourth, and the third, second, and first layers of that mundane egg. So let me repeat. The scintillas are the souls. These are the souls that are underneath the oversoul. Earlier in the secret doctrine that we've talked about, these are the souls in the fifth layer of the mundane egg that are under the sixth layer of the mundane egg. These souls appear in the threefold form of monads, atoms, and gods. So the souls themselves are the gods. They appear in the forms of monads or units, which are solar suns. And they work through the atoms. And the atoms are this combination of prana, linga, and stula in the third, second, and first layers of the mundane egg, according to our teaching. She continues. "Every atom becomes a visible complex unit, a molecule. And once attracted into the sphere of terrestrial activity, the monadic essence, passing through the mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms, becomes man." And so we're dealing with the monadic essence moving through mineral, vegetable, and animal kingdoms And here we say that it becomes man, the monadic essence, the essence becoming man, because the monad here is corresponding to the fourth layer of the mundane egg, and man is corresponding to the fourth principle upwards. She continues, again, God, monad, and Adam are the correspondences of spirit, mind, and body in man. In their septenary aggregation, they are the heavenly man. Thus, terrestrial man is the provisional reflection of the heavenly. The monads are the souls of the atoms. Both are the fabric in which the Chohans, Dhyani's gods, clothe themselves when a form is needed. So the gods clothe themselves in the fourth, third, second, and first layer when needed. Just to briefly show that point, let me turn to Gottfried de Purucker in Fundamentals of the Esoteric Philosophy, once again published by Theosophical University Press, located out of Pasadena. And if we take a look at page 404, where he has a diagram at the very bottom, he lists out the 7 layers of the mundane egg. And in doing so, he places as number 1, Swabhavat, as the 7th layer of the mundane egg. He places as number 2, Adi Buddhi, as the 6th layer of the mundane egg. And he places as number 3, the gods, as the 5th layer of the mundane egg. He places 4th, the monads, as the 4th layer of the mundane egg. And then he continues on down with the 5th, 6th, and 7th as the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st layers of the mundane egg, being souls, atoms, and bodies. But the key point here is that we see very clearly that gods correspond to the 5th layer of the mundane egg, and monads, as the element of fire, corresponds to the 4th layer of the mundane egg. And let's go ahead and continue in the next paragraph down there. Now, why do we know that we're referring to the 7 layers of the mundane egg? Well, because of the way Blavatsky writes. This relates to cosmic, and she spells that with a C, not with a K. So we're dealing with the 7 layers of the mundane egg in that 3rd paragraph. And subplanetary monads, not to the supercosmic monas, the Pythagorean monads. So we're not dealing here with the highest 3 logoi. We're dealing with the mundane egg, as called in its synthetic character by the pantheistical Peripatetics. The monads of the present dissertation are treated from the standpoint of their individuality as atomic souls before these atoms descend into purely terrestrial forms. So, gods, monads, atoms. They can be looked at numerous ways. Yes, one can look at gods, monads, and atoms from the perspective of the 3 logoi, but for the most part here in this section, she's referring to the gods, the 5th layer of the mundane egg, the monads, the 4th layer of the mundane egg, and the atoms as the combination of the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st layer of the mundane egg. This is why earlier in the Secret Doctrine, when we were talking about the end of the Mahamanvantara, the 311 trillion year cycle, and the beginning of the Mahapralaya, Blavatsky has the life forces. She has the gods retreating from the planetary bodies to the solar bodies in the 4th layer, and then ascending up from that into the 5th layer. This is why the gods return to the 5th layer of the mundane egg at the close of the Mahamanvantara. It's all there. We only have to take our time to read it. I hope that provides lots of food for thought. Thank you so much for listening. Have a good day.